A mother pleaded before the castle gates. "Save my sick son." And the prince couldn't ignore her desperation. The cold pressed against Isolde Harrow's skin with the persistence of a living thing, creeping beneath the layers of her rough woolen shawl and biting through the thin kirtle she wore beneath. Her breath came in shallow bursts, fogging in the frigid air as she clutched her son closer to her chest. Samson stirred weakly against her, his small face flushed with fever beneath the threadbare edge of her shawl. She had walked since before dawn, her boots leaving wavering tracks along the frost-hardened road. The snow from the night before had crusted over the fields, transforming the familiar landscape of Westerborn into an unforgiving expanse. Yet the thought of stopping, of turning back, had never occurred to her. Word had reached the village that a royal physician had arrived at Castle Westerborn to tend to the noble guests gathered for the winter feast. It was a faint hope, and one she had no right to claim, but hope nonetheless. Her pace faltered as the towering silhouette of the castle rose through the mist ahead. Spires and chimneys pierced the pale sky, and banners hung stiff with frost above the battlements. Within those stone walls warmth waited, and perhaps salvation. Isolde reached the outer gates just as the bells of St. Aldwyn's struck 10. The sound echoed through the courtyard beyond, barely audible over the hammering of her own heart. 2 guards in heavy cloaks stood sentry beside the iron portcullis, their halberds gleaming. Beyond them, faint strains of lute and pipe drifted from the open galleries, mingling with the laughter of unseen nobles. Summoning what little strength remained, Isolde approached the gate. The guards straightened, eyes narrowing as they took in her appearance, a peasant woman with wind-chapped cheeks, bedraggled hair tucked beneath a linen coif, and a child wrapped in a makeshift bundle. "Halt!" one barked, voice muffled by the wool across his mouth. "State your business." "My son." Her voice cracked from cold and exhaustion. She forced the words out, clearer this time. "My son is gravely ill. I beg you. There is a physician here. Let me speak with him." The second guard exchanged a glance with his companion, mouth curling with disdain. The court physician serves the noble families, not common beggars from the fields. "I have no other recourse," she pleaded, tightening her hold as Samson whimpered. "I have walked all night. Please." "No entry," the first guard said flatly, already turning away. Isolde's knees gave beneath her, and she sank to the frozen cobblestones before the gate. Her palms pressed against the icy stones as she struggled to keep Samson sheltered beneath her cloak. "Please," she cried, the desperation raw in her voice. "I beg you. His fever will take him if you do not help." A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, tugging at her skirts and sending shivers across her skin. The guards stood unmoved, eyes fixed elsewhere, as though she had ceased to exist. But her voice had carried. Footsteps echoed from the covered walkway beyond the gate as several courtiers emerged from the galleries, drawn by the commotion. Velvet hems swept the stones, and gloved hands lifted perfumed kerchiefs to painted faces as the nobles surveyed the scene below with thinly veiled disgust. "That woman has no place here," one murmured. "She would bring pestilence to the feast," another said sharply. Isolde heard their words, but did not falter. Tears streaked her face as she gathered Samson closer. His breaths came fast and shallow against her shoulder. "Help us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He is only a child." Above the courtyard, behind a balustrade of pale stone, Prince Alaric stood watching. The festive gathering within the great hall had wearied him, as such events always did. He had sought refuge in the high gallery, drawn to solitude rather than the hollow pleasantries of court. But the woman's voice, thin yet unbroken, had reached him even there. He leaned forward, hands gripping the balustrade. The sight below arrested him, a young woman kneeling in the snow, her shawl barely shielding her frail frame, clutching a child against her chest as the guards stood indifferent. Something tightened in his throat. He had seen peasants beg before. He had seen mothers plead for bread, for justice, for mercy. But there was something in this woman's bearing, a quiet defiance beneath the desperation, that struck him with unsettling force. Without a word, Alaric turned from the gallery and descended the stone stairway, his steps swift and sure. His steward, Sir Aldwyn, caught sight of him in the corridor below. "Your Highness," the steward said, bowing hastily, "the feast awaits your return." "I have other matters to attend," Alaric replied curtly, brushing past. By the time he reached the courtyard, a small crowd had gathered. The nobles watched with avid curiosity, their gazes flickering between the guards and the slight figure huddled on the stones. The whispers grew as Alaric strode into view, his forest-green cloak billowing behind him. The guards straightened at his approach. The older one bowed stiffly. "Your Highness!" "Who is this woman?" Alaric demanded, his voice low but commanding. "A peasant, sire. She seeks entry. Claims her child is ill." Alaric's gaze swept the scene. Isolde knelt before him, unaware of his presence. Her hair had slipped from beneath her coif, dark strands plastered to her damp cheeks. She rocked gently, murmuring words of comfort to the child who lay motionless against her breast. "Has no one summoned the physician?" Alaric asked sharply. "My lord, the council would not approve." "Damn the council." The words fell from his lips without hesitation. "Open the gate." "Your Highness," Sir Aldwyn interjected, alarmed. "This will cause scandal." "The feast is already underway." Alaric's gaze cut to him, steely and unyielding. "I gave an order." With clear reluctance, the guards complied. The iron gate groaned as it rose, the grinding of the winch echoing through the courtyard. The murmurs among the courtiers swelled. Isolde looked up, blinking against the brightness of the snow. A tall figure now stood before her, clad in rich velvet and bearing the unmistakable presence of command. "Madam," Alaric said, voice gentler now, "you and your son will be taken inside. The physician will see him at once." Her lips parted in shock. For a moment, she could not speak. "Go with the guards," he continued. "You have my word." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, my lord. Thank you." As the guards moved to assist her, one taking the child carefully from her trembling arms, the onlookers watched with avid fascination and thinly veiled outrage. From the shadows of the eastern gallery, Lady Celestine Fairley observed the scene with narrowed eyes. Draped in a gown of black velvet and silver, her pale hands tightened around the silk fan she held. A dark flush rose beneath the powder on her cheeks. She turned to the pair of young noblewomen beside her, voice a silken thread of malice. "This will not stand." The room smelled faintly of beeswax and damp stone. Isolde sat beside the narrow bed where Samson lay, swaddled in blankets finer than any they had ever known. The rush-strewn floor and rough-hewn beams overhead spoke of a space set apart from the castle's grandeur, one meant for servants or guests of no consequence. Yet it was warmer than the December wind that had nearly stolen her son's breath, and for that alone she gave silent thanks. The royal physician, Master Gerard, bent over the boy, his lined face impassive as he worked. A small brazier glowed in the corner, heating glass vials of tincture and decoction. His hands moved with practiced precision, applying a salve of myrrh and poppy to Samson's temples, then lifting a silver spoon to his lips with trembling care. "Swallow, little one," Gerard murmured. "There now." Samson whimpered weakly, but obeyed, his eyes fluttering beneath dark lashes. Isolde's fingers clenched in her lap as she watched. The physician straightened at last, wiping his hands on a linen cloth. "He is stronger than he appears," he said to her, voice clipped but not unkind. "This fever is grave, but with rest and this treatment, he may yet mend. We must pray his strength holds." Tears stung her eyes. "I am grateful, Master Gerard." "You cannot know." "I know enough," he said briskly, gathering his implements. His gaze flickered toward the doorway. "The prince has granted you temporary shelter. But be aware, you walk a narrow path here. Not all within these walls will look kindly on your presence. Isolde's heart tightened. She had seen the way the courtiers stared when the guards led her through the stone corridors, heard the hushed voices and contemptuous laughter that followed in her wake. This room, bare, windowless save for a narrow slit high in the wall, might well be a cell for all the warmth the castle showed her. But she had not come seeking favor or friendship. Only her son's life mattered. When Master Gerard departed, the room fell into uneasy stillness. Isolde dampened a cloth and brushed it gently across Samson's brow. His skin, though still too warm, no longer burned with the fire that had raged through him the day before. Each small breath seemed a miracle. A faint knock disturbed the silence. She turned, uncertain, as the heavy door creaked open. Prince Alaric stood in the threshold. Gone was the commanding figure who had faced the guards in the courtyard. Now he wore a plain doublet of deep green, his dark cloak slung carelessly over one shoulder. A curious tension marked his bearing, as though he, too, was unsure of the ground upon which they met. "Your Highness," she whispered, rising instinctively. "Please," he said quietly, "be seated." He hesitated a moment longer, then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Isolde resumed her place beside the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap. The prince remained standing near the brazier, watching her with a gaze that seemed to weigh every word left unspoken. "I came to inquire after the boy," Alaric began, his voice measured. "Has the physician given hope?" "He has." She forced her tone steady, though her heart raced. "I thank you, my lord. Without your intervention, it was no great act." His mouth tightened. No mother should be forced to beg for her child's life. The raw edge of his words surprised her. For a moment, silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. Then Alaric's gaze shifted to the small figure in the bed. "He is brave," he said softly. "He is all I have," Isolde replied, the words slipping out before caution could stop them. A flicker of something passed through the prince's eyes, not pity, but understanding. He moved closer, his steps soundless on the rushes. When he knelt beside the bed, she stiffened instinctively, but he made no move to touch the child. Instead, he studied Samson's pale face with a gravity that unsettled her more than any show of princely authority. "I would not see harm come to him," Alaric said at last. The simplicity of it left her momentarily bereft of words. She met his gaze, steel blue and clear with no artifice there, and felt the first crack in her wary composure. "I know not why you have shown such kindness to a stranger," she said softly, "but I do not forget it." He rose then, perhaps sensing the limits of her trust. His mouth curved in a faint, almost rueful smile. "I fear kindness may soon be counted against us both," he murmured. "Rest, madam. Your son will need your strength." With a slight bow, he turned and departed, leaving her more unsettled than comforted. Days passed in a slow, uncertain rhythm. The castle remained an unfamiliar maze of stone and shadow. Servants came and went with perfunctory care, bringing meals on wooden trays, changing linens without a word. None lingered. The chill in their eyes spoke more loudly than any voice. News of her presence had spread. That much was plain. Whispers followed her through the halls when she ventured briefly beyond her chamber. Even among the lower servants, scorn flickered in glances and veiled words. Yet within the small confines of the room, a fragile peace grew. Samson's fever began to ebb. His cheeks lost their flush. His breathing deepened. On the fourth morning, he opened his eyes fully for the first time, his small hand clutching hers with feeble strength. She wept silently then, holding him close. Prince Alaric's visits became more frequent. At first, they spoke only of Samson's progress. Brief, formal exchanges shadowed by awkward civility. But something shifted with each encounter. The prince lingered a little longer, seated now upon the worn stool beside her. Their words turned gradually to other things. He spoke of the countryside beyond the castle walls, of the river that wound through Wesserborn's green valleys. She spoke, cautiously at first, of her life on the tenant farm, of the hardships faced by those who tilled the land beneath noble gaze. In these moments, Isolde glimpsed a man beneath the crown, a man wearied by the roles demanded of him. Yet always the invisible divide remained. She never forgot it, nor the cost of forgetting. Unseen by them, the court's agitation deepened. Lady Celestine watched each development with mounting fury. In private gatherings, her allies whispered of scandal and impropriety. That a peasant woman should command such attention from the prince was intolerable. One afternoon, as pale light slanted through the high window, Sir Aldwyn sought Alaric in his private study. The steward's face was grim as he placed a folded document upon the prince's desk. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I bring this to your attention, for discretion." Alaric unfolded the parchment, eyes narrowing as he read. It was an old record, drawn from the archives of the council. The name of Isolde's late husband, Garrick Harrow, listed among those suspected of dissent against royal levies some 5 years past. No charges had been proven, but the stain remained, ready to be exploited. A muscle worked in Alaric's jaw as he set the parchment down. He stared at the curling script, the weight of it heavy in the air. The court would seize upon this at once. His gaze darkened. The days slipped past in a rhythm both fragile and consuming. Though word of Isolde's presence had now saturated every corner of the castle, Alaric's steps continued to lead him toward the modest chamber in the servants' wing where Samson was recovering. If caution warred within him, it did not outweigh a quieter, more insistent pull, one he had stopped trying to name. He came first in the mornings, beneath the pretext of seeking the physician's latest report. Then again in the afternoons, when the shadows in the high window softened the stark stone walls, and always, before the castle settled into night, when the world beyond that small chamber seemed to lose its grip. During one such visit, Alaric arrived carrying a small parcel beneath his arm. His footsteps were muffled against the rush-strewn floor as he entered. Isolde looked up from where she sat beside Samson's bed, her needle paused in the mending of her son's shirt. "My lord," she greeted softly. He inclined his head, but did not speak at once. There was a tension to him today, a restlessness in the way his shoulders set. Then, wordlessly, he placed the parcel upon the table and unfolded the cloth that wrapped it. Books, a half-dozen slim volumes, their worn bindings betraying much handling. The spines gleamed faintly in the dim light. "For your son," Alaric said. His voice held no ceremony. "And for you, should you wish." Isolde stared at them, momentarily undone. Her gaze lifted to meet his. "You are very kind, but I fear I can offer little thanks for such a gift." "No thanks are required." He hesitated. "I thought the boy might be cheered by stories. They helped me once when illness kept me abed." A faint smile touched her mouth, quick and uncertain. "You speak as though you were ever frail." "I was younger than he is now," Alaric replied, a shadow passing over his face. "And more willful, I suspect." Samson stirred, turning toward the sound of their voices. His gaze brightened at the sight of the prince, and Alaric crossed to the bedside with quiet steps. "Shall we make a bargain?" Alaric asked the boy, kneeling so their faces were level. "If you are strong enough to sit, I shall show you a court dance fit for a prince." Samson blinked, then managed a faint nod. With care, Alaric lifted him, propping him gently with pillows. Isolde's breath caught at the ease of the prince's hands, the patience in his voice as he spoke to her son. Not as a sovereign to a subject, but as a man to a child, he wished to comfort. Alaric rose and cleared a space in the room, gesturing for Samson to watch. He demonstrated a simple step, light and graceful despite the narrow confines. The boy's eyes gleamed with wonder. Alaric reached out a hand. "Come," he said softly. "You need not dance perfectly, only bravely." With a small nod from his mother, Samson slipped from the bed, swaying at first, then steadier as Alaric guided him through the steps. Laughter bubbled from the boy's throat, a sound that struck Isolde's heart with unexpected force. The lesson lasted but a few minutes before weariness overtook the child. Alaric carried him back to the bed, tucking the blanket with a tenderness that stilled Isolde's hands in her lap. Their gazes met across the dim room. Neither spoke. Time seemed to stretch and bend within that silence. When Alaric finally rose to leave, the flickering candlelight caught a softness in his expression, something unguarded that left Isolde struggling to steady her breath. In the days that followed, the rhythm of his visits deepened. Their conversations grew easier, shaded with quiet confidences. Alaric spoke of the burden of duty, the weight of expectation that had pressed upon him since boyhood. Isolde, hesitant at first, spoke of her life upon the tenant farm, of nights spent sewing by candlelight to make ends meet, of the loneliness that grief had carved within her. Yet beneath each exchange lay a tension neither dared name. It wove through their silences, through the brush of fingers as they adjusted Samson's blanket, through a glance held too long when the candles burned low. The court noticed. Rumors swirled with the haste of wildfire. Alaric's absences from the hunting parties, his refusal to join the council feasts, each fueled whispers that reached even the servants' quarters. The name of the peasant woman became a scandalous refrain upon noble tongues. Lady Celestine watched with growing fury. In the privacy of her chambers, she devised her retaliation, a means not merely to discredit Isolde, but to remind the court of its unshakable order. A formal banquet was declared, ostensibly to celebrate the Queen's forthcoming visit. The invitation was extended to Alaric with thinly veiled insistence. To decline would be to stoke further scandal. Alaric received the summons in silence. When next he visited Isolde's chamber, his manner bore a quiet gravity. "They will hold a banquet," he told her. "I am expected to attend." She nodded, though her throat tightened. "You must do as is required of you." Alaric's gaze softened. "I would have you there." She stilled. "My lord, you will not sit alone in this chamber while others speak of you in venomous tones. Come, for your son's sake, and mine." The conviction in his voice brooked no refusal. After a pause, Isolde bowed her head. On the night of the banquet, she dressed with trembling fingers in the dark blue gown provided by a sympathetic maid. Her heart pounded with each step as she followed Alaric into the great hall. The candlelit expanse was a world unto itself, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, gilded banners stirring faintly in unseen draughts. Tables gleamed beneath silver and crystal, while nobles arrayed in finery turned to mark her entrance with narrowed eyes. Alaric led her toward the tables, but at the last moment, a steward intercepted them, murmuring with apologetic finality. Isolde was to be seated apart, among the lesser guests. Alaric's jaw tightened, but she touched his arm lightly. "It is no matter," she said softly. "Go." Reluctantly, he released her. Isolde took her place at the lowest table, surrounded by servants and merchants. Eyes burned upon her from every direction. Whispers hissed through the air like unseen arrows. Lady Celestine presided from the high table, resplendent in black velvet and diamonds. Her gaze lingered upon Isolde with cold satisfaction. The meal unfolded in stilted silence. Isolde lifted her goblet with a steady hand, though her pulse throbbed beneath her skin. Near the banquet's end, Celestine rose with calculated grace. Her voice rang clear through the hall. "There is much to admire in those who know their place," she said, her smile thin as a blade, "and much to pity in those who do not." The words hung in the air, their target unmistakable. A flush burned beneath Isolde's skin, but she lifted her chin, refusing to lower her gaze. Then a chair scraped sharply against stone. Alaric stood. The hall stilled. "My lady," he said, his voice cold and precise, "I find that true nobility is measured not by birth, but by honor, and by the courage to show compassion where others would scorn." A shocked murmur rippled through the assembly. Alaric's gaze swept the hall. "I will not stand by while a guest under my protection is insulted in my presence." The words rang like steel upon stone. Celestine's face blanched beneath her powder. Silence claimed the hall as Alaric resumed his seat, his expression carved from iron. Later, when the banquet had ended, Alaric returned to his chambers, wearied in body, but not in resolve. A folded parchment awaited him upon his desk, the seal of the Privy Council stark against the pale wax. He broke it open, eyes scanning the precise script. The demand was clear: remove the woman at once, or face proceedings that would strip him of his title as heir. Alaric stared down at the letter, his hands tightening. He understood, with bone-deep clarity, what defiance would now cost him. The letter lay upon the desk all night, its seal broken, its words burned into Alaric's thoughts. Dawn came grey and thin, the air within his chambers chill despite the fire laid low in the hearth. He had not slept. When the knock came, a brisk rap upon the oaken door, he was already dressed, standing at the window with one hand resting against the cold stone. Sir Aldwyn entered, his face taut. "Your Highness, the Privy Council awaits you in the Great Hall." Alaric turned. His expression gave nothing away. "They waste no time." The steward hesitated. "Shall I accompany you?" "No. This is mine to answer." The corridor beyond was hushed, the usual bustle of servants stilled as he passed. Word had traveled swiftly. By now all within the castle knew of the council's demand and the prince's silence in its wake. As Alaric entered the great hall, 100 gazes followed him. The long table where the council sat gleamed with polished oak beneath the flickering sconces. At its center, Lord Morven, the Queen's appointed chancellor, presided with impassive gravity. To his right sat the elder nobles, faces lined with both wisdom and suspicion. Lady Celestine occupied her place among them, resplendent in black silk, her eyes fixed upon Alaric with cool intent. He stood alone before them. "My lords," Lord Morven began, his voice echoing through the vast space, "you are summoned today to address a matter of grave concern, one which strikes at the very stability of this court." A murmur of assent rippled along the table. "It is not our desire to question your Highness's compassion," the Chancellor continued. "Yet the presence of this woman, Isolde Harrow, within these walls has become a source of disruption. The Council's duty is clear, to preserve the dignity of the crown and its heir." Alaric listened in silence, his jaw set. Lord Morven's gaze sharpened. "We therefore issue this final request, that the woman be removed from the castle forthwith. Should your Highness decline, the Council will be forced to convene proceedings to reconsider your succession." The words hung in the cold air. Alaric stepped forward. The rustle of his cloak seemed to fill the chamber. He surveyed the faces before him, meeting each gaze with unflinching calm. "I will answer," he said. His voice was low, yet carried through the hall with unmistakable clarity. A tense hush followed. "You speak of dignity," Alaric continued. "You speak of stability. Yet I ask, what dignity lies in casting out an innocent woman who has committed no crime, whose only offense is to seek help for her child?" Lord Morven's brows drew together. "This is not a question of her conduct. It is a matter of appearances, of bloodlines, of the precedent we set." "Then let us speak of precedent," Alaric said. A current of steel threaded through his tone now. "Shall we condemn by association? Shall we declare that one's worth is bound forever to a name or to the shadows of the past? If so, then none among us is free from stain." A ripple stirred the assembly. Even among the council, some shifted uneasily. "She is no threat," Alaric pressed. "She asks no favor beyond a mother's right to protect her child. If her presence wounds your pride, I say the fault lies not with her, but with us." Lady Celestine's gaze darkened. "And what of propriety, my lord? Of the example set before the court? before the realm. Alaric's eyes met hers without wavering. I will not set an example of cowardice, nor will I see a woman judged by the whispers of those who fear compassion more than scandal. The words struck the hall like a blade drawn clean. A breathless pause followed. Among the nobles, a subtle shift began. Some exchanged guarded looks, the beginnings of alignment taking root. Support, opposition. The battle lines had been drawn. Lady Celestine rose in a swirl of dark silk. Her lips were pale, her composure brittle. "You choose your path, my lord," she said softly. "But know this, you walk it alone." Without another word, she swept from the chamber. The great doors closed behind her with a resonant thud. Alaric straightened. "I have spoken my will. If this council would strip me of my title for the sake of injustice, let them do so openly. I will not yield to threat nor to convenience." He turned and left the hall, his step measured, his heart hammering beneath the calm he wore like armor. That evening, a message arrived for Isolde, a summons to the prince's private chambers. The guard who brought it spoke no more than necessary, his expression unreadable. Isolde's hands trembled as she folded the parchment. A summons from Alaric, under the guise of further questioning, yet she knew there was more beneath the words. With slow, steady breaths, she prepared herself. The gown she donned was simple, her hair loosely bound. She had no desire for artifice, only truth. When she entered the chamber, the door closing softly behind her, the flickering glow of the hearth met her gaze. Alaric stood near the fire, his posture tense, one hand resting upon the mantel. "My lord," she began. He turned. At the sight of her, the iron in his expression softened, though the weariness in his eyes remained. "You need not call me that," he said quietly. A silence stretched between them, rich with unspoken thought. "I was summoned," she managed. "I summoned you because—" He broke off, exhaling sharply. "Because I can no longer pretend this is mere obligation." She met his gaze, her breath caught. "Nor can I." Alaric crossed the room with unhurried steps, stopping before her. His voice dropped to a low, aching register. "You must know what they ask of me, what they would have me sacrifice." Isolde's throat tightened. "And what of what I risk, my lord? Already the court scorns me. Your kindness has shielded me, but it cannot erase the truth. We are not of the same world." "No," Alaric agreed, "but I no longer care for the boundaries of that world." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You cannot say such things." "I must." His voice roughened. "Because if I do not, I will regret it all my days." The last defenses between them fell in that moment. Isolde reached for him, not with boldness, but with trembling need, and he caught her hand in his. "I do not seek to bind you to a life you cannot bear," Alaric whispered. "But I must speak plainly, at least this once." Isolde's voice was scarcely more than a breath. "My heart is no longer mine to guard." The confession left her exposed, yet strangely free. Alaric drew her close, his hands reverent as they framed her face. Then, without words, he kissed her. It was no courtly gesture, no calculated move. It was a raw, reverent promise, an offering given freely. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his doublet, and for one stolen moment, nothing existed beyond the warmth of his mouth against hers. A sharp knock shattered the stillness. Alaric stepped back, breath unsteady. The door opened, and a royal courier entered, his expression grave. "A summons, Your Highness," the courier announced. "From Her Majesty the Queen. You are commanded to appear in London at once." The chamber held its breath as Alaric broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His voice, when he spoke, was low and even. "The Queen has summoned me to answer for my conduct." The carriage swayed steadily over the frozen road, its iron-bound wheels creaking against the uneven stones. Alaric sat within, his gaze fixed on the pale horizon that edged ever closer as they neared London. He had departed Castle Westerborn with only a small retinue, Sir Aldwyn among them, choosing trusted companions for this most uncertain of journeys. The Queen's summons had been clear, her tone one of royal command rather than invitation. There would be no avoiding this reckoning, nor softening it. The Privy Council would be present. Lady Celestine's allies would surely press for Isolde's removal, and worse. But Alaric had made his choice. No power in England would move him from it. Beside him, Sir Aldwyn cleared his throat. "Your Highness, you know there will be no easy ground within that chamber." "I do not seek ease," Alaric replied quietly. "Only truth." They reached London by dusk. The city was cloaked in smoke and frost, its crooked streets crowded with vendors and beggars, even as the cold pressed deeper into the stones. The royal palace gleamed above the throng, lanterns flickering behind its mullioned windows. Inside, warmth and expectation thickened the air. Word of the prince's arrival had already reached the court. The Queen's Council assembled with purposeful swiftness. Alaric entered the great chamber with measured steps. At the high dais sat the Queen, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson, her face composed but watchful. Around her gathered the lords and ladies of the realm, eyes bright with curiosity and judgment alike. He bowed deeply, then rose to meet the Queen's gaze. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady, "I come as summoned." "You are welcome, my lord," she replied, her tone cool. "We are told you have given cause for unrest in Westerborn, that the court there is divided, and that your conduct has raised questions." Alaric inclined his head. "I have defended a woman wronged by unjust scorn, and I would do so again." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Lord Morven rose from the council's table. "Your Majesty, the prince shelters a peasant woman whose late husband was known to defy royal levies. Her presence invites scandal, and her influence—" "I know well what is said," Alaric interrupted, his voice sharpened by conviction. "But no man, nor woman, should be condemned by past shadows. Isolde Harrow came to the castle seeking only life for her son. Her courage, her dignity, these have moved me beyond all station or name." His words rang clear through the hall, silencing even the murmurers. "I do not deny my feelings," he continued, "but I reject the notion that love or honor should bow to rank alone. If we hold that a person's worth is measured by birth, then what justice governs this realm? If compassion is weakness, then let me be weak." The Queen's gaze narrowed, but her expression softened with something more complex than disapproval. She spoke at last, her voice measured. "You argue with eloquence, my lord, yet governance must weigh more than heart. The realm watches its prince. Appearances must be preserved." "Then let appearances reflect truth," Alaric said simply. A pause followed, deep and fraught. At length the Queen leaned forward. "Very well. If this woman is what you claim, if her character can withstand the scrutiny of this court, then I will raise no objection to her presence, nor to any future union you may seek." A collective stir passed through the chamber. "You will see to it," the Queen added. "A test of character shall be arranged. Let the court judge her conduct with open eyes." Alaric bowed once more, his relief tempered only by the knowledge of what this would ask of Isolde. "I thank your Majesty for her wisdom." The Queen's eyes glittered faintly. "Do not thank me yet, my lord." By the time Alaric returned to Castle Westerborn, the frost had begun to soften beneath a wan sun. He found Isolde in her chamber, her eyes weary but steady. He told her all, sparing nothing. "They will watch you," he said. "Judge you in every word, every step. But I believe in you. And more than that, I love you." Her breath caught, her voice unsteady. "And if I fail them, you will not." His fingers brushed her cheek, reverent. "You need only be as you are." A public ball was arranged within days, a gathering to honor the Queen's decree. The castle hummed with restless anticipation, Nobles assembling in silks and satins, servants racing to prepare the great hall. The night of the ball arrived. Isolde stood before the small mirror in her chamber, her heart pounding beneath the simple but elegant gown gifted by a noblewoman moved by her story. A gown of deep green velvet, unadorned save for a single strand of pearls at her throat. Samson watched her with wide eyes. "You look like a princess, Mama." She smiled faintly, brushing a kiss to his brow. "Not a princess, my love. Only myself." Alaric met her outside the hall, his gaze warm with pride and something deeper. He offered his arm without ceremony, and she took it with trembling fingers. Within, the great hall shimmered with candlelight, gold and crimson banners gleaming above. The court gathered in clusters, eyes turning as Alaric and Isolde entered together. The murmurs began at once, yet she held her head high, her steps measured. At the Queen's signal, the assembly quieted. Isolde stood alone before them now, the hush in the hall deepening. She drew a breath, her voice clear, though her hands trembled at her sides. "My lords and ladies," she began, "I stand here not by design, nor by any ambition of my own. I came seeking only life for my son. Yet in this place I have learned that dignity, kindness, and courage are measured not by birth, but by heart." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I ask only to be judged by my actions, not by shadows I did not cast. Let compassion, not pride, guide us." She stepped back then, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. A long silence followed. Then, one by one, nobles began to murmur assent. A few even offered nods of respect. The tide, long poised against her, had begun to turn. In the days that followed, opposition faded. The Queen herself sent a private message to Alaric. Tacit approval granted, her objections stilled. And so, beneath the ancient oaks of Castle Wesseborn, on a morning softened by bird-song and sunlight, Alaric and Isolde were wed. Commoners and nobles alike gathered, the lines between them blurred for one radiant moment. Samson, now fully recovered, served as page, his laughter bright as he scattered petals before his mother. As Alaric took Isolde's hands beneath the green canopy of leaves, his voice was low with wonder. "You are my heart," he whispered, "and my future." Her answering smile was radiant through tears. Their vows sealed beneath sky and oak, they turned at last to face the world, no longer divided by rank or fear, but bound by a love that had weathered all. And in that moment, as their hands clasped and their eyes met, there was no power in the realm that could undo what they had won. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.